Hey, how's it going? I'm Andy Blanks from YM360, and I'm excited about talking you through these Upended teacher prep videos. I love this Upended study, and I'm so glad that you're going to be leading this for your students. You know, we think about the world our students live in and how they're used to or conditioned to go about their lives. And we don't even know that we're doing it. I say we're the same as our students. We all have these expectations or rules that we sort of teach ourselves and learn about how to navigate the world around us, about how to get by day in and day out. And we have these expectations, right? Our students kind of know what it takes to live in their world and to interact with this group of people or this group of people. They know what to expect when they walk down the halls or walk into the lunchroom. They build these rules about how they're going to behave to look popular or have their image look just right. And it's all these little narratives that we tell ourselves, all these rules and expectations. We build these kind of mini frameworks that we use to kind of go through life. Here's the interesting thing. We never really stop and ask ourselves, are these frameworks right and true? Are they best for us? Are they good? Are we thriving, or are we merely just getting by? Are we merely just surviving? I think you'd agree with me that a lot of our students in the world today kind of have that mindset where they're just kind of getting by. They're doing what they know best to do to kind of get through each day and to live in the chaotic world that they live in. God has a better way. And we know that. We see it in Scripture. And one of the cool things about Upended is we're teaching students how God upends the expectations of the world, that God turns the wisdom of the world upside down, that God's ways are better and higher and more true and more right than our ways. And this understanding we have of how we navigate the world never leads us to the same place that God's ways do. And so that's what we're going to do over these 4 sessions, is we're going to teach your students God's expectations. We're going to show them a few different ways how God turns their expectations and those rules they've taught themselves and the pathways they navigate to get by, how God changes those. And that God's ways are better than our ways. We're going to do that in this first session by looking at how God really sort of upends or flips our understanding of strength and what it means to be strong. We're going to do this by looking at one of my favorite passages of Scripture, where Paul in 2 Corinthians 7 talks about how he kind of comes to this same understanding. And if you know this passage, you know that Paul actually starts with this really kind of odd to our ears explanation of having this vision of heaven, some aspect, some vision that God allows him to see. We don't know exactly what that is. It's not really spelled out clearly. Paul's not super interested in fleshing that out for us. But he says, I had this vision, I got caught, and he's actually talking as if he's talking about somebody else. But commentary writers in the original language, we know that Paul is talking about himself, and he says that he has this experience, and kind of, again, if you're familiar with this passage, to keep him from being conceited, in Paul's words, God allowed him to experience what he calls this thorn in his flesh. And again, you've heard this story. We don't know what that thorn in his flesh is. We don't know if it was some sort of a temptation. We don't know if it was a health thing, right? We know that Paul kind of suffered from poor eyesight. Maybe he had shingles or something like that. People kind of tried to assume what that might be. We don't know what the thorn in his flesh is, but here's what we know. We know that God, in Paul's own words, allowed him to be sort of afflicted this way in order to humble him and lead Paul to this place where he could say, as he says in his passage, that he's not going to boast about his place in the church or these visions that God has allowed him to see. He boasts in his weakness because God, in your passage, they're in red letters. Jesus says this to Paul, that God's grace is sufficient for Paul. It's enough. Paul doesn't need anything else. He doesn't need the world's sort of view of strength and popularity and that he's arrived at this lofty, but no, he just needs God's grace. And then Paul says, you know what, I'm thankful for this. I'm thankful for that thorn in my side because I can now boast in my weakness. I can say that I'm glad to be weak. I'm glad to be afflicted because in my weakness, God's power is made perfect. That's the heart of this lesson. We want to help your students understand that God's upended expectations of strength is embracing our weakness so that we can clearly see the power of God at work in us. That's God's upended definition of what it means to be strong. And so what we're going to do in this lesson is help your students really kind of articulate this idea, like in their world, what does it look like for them to apply this teaching in their lives? And what does weakness look like? How can they embrace their weakness? How can they rely on God's strength so that God's strength is evident in their life? Not only for others to see that, but for them to experience the strength of God that only comes when we surrender any notions we have of our own strength and embrace our weakness so that we can really just kind of live out God's strength in our life. So that's what you're going to do in this lesson. This is a wonderful passage of Scripture, and I think the lesson really helps you flesh that out. So as you prepare, if you have any questions about this content, this passage, or anything like that, please don't hesitate to let us know. You can email us, call us, live chat us, and I look forward to seeing you on another Upended Teacher Prep video.